Chapter at Graduate School. And my lab works on biology of aging and age-related disease, fruit flies, and pet dogs. And pet dogs are not in the lab. And I'm also one of the directors of an umbrella graduate program called Molecular Diagnosis of Medicine and Disease, which is sort of multi-department graduate program here at the University.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Nenhauser, and I am a professor in the Grad School department. My lab works on what I would call plant logic. So we try to understand the fundamental processes of protein degradation and transcriptional regulation, and try to understand the sort of rules that are operating there that influence how plants normally develop and respond to the environment, in the hopes of both understanding those interesting questions in themselves, and also trying to figure out how we might be able to get tools to subsistence farmers all over the world to be able to develop their own crops to be more robust in the face of climate change.
My name is Yannicka Hillary-Slambers. I'm a faculty member in the biology department. I'm a plant community ecologist, so I'm really interested in understanding why, outdoors to different places in Washington, you see the groups of species, plant species together that you see at different elevations, for example, or different parts of the state. Myself and my graduate students have been spending a lot of time working at Mount Rainier National Park. One of our other interests is trying to understand how climate change will influence plants, both where they are and, for example, when they flower. So we spend most of our time in the summer running around the mountain and collecting lots of data, and then most of the time we do are analyzing and processing it. And I right now have 4 graduate students in the lab and about 5 or 6 other candidates.
My name is Ben Kerr. I'm a faculty member also in the biology department. Our labs also have a nice mix of grads and undergrads. In our lab, basically, when I was an undergrad, what I found so fascinating about biology was how really simple interactions at molecular, cellular, organismal, population, community scales could lead to just incredibly dynamic, responsive, and really beautiful living systems. And so in a very broad way, that our lab focuses on these interactions, the evolution of these interactions in specifics. So, which means at all these different scales. So that means we look at things like coevolution of proteins that have to bind one another in order to function properly. We look at the evolution of cell-cell communication. We look at the evolution of ecological interactions of various kinds. So how do competing species evolve? How do mutualistic species evolve? And those pathogens evolve. We use a variety of techniques, mathematical modeling. We use computer-based simulations. We also use experiments with microbes, so viruses, bacteria, and yeast. To study these. Microbes are wonderful because they're very small, and they have very short generation time. So you can propagate enormous populations over many, many generations, which for us is not that much time. And you can watch evolution unfold in real time. They can also be frozen and reanimated, which means for these evolution experiments, you can keep a fossil record, a living fossil record, and explore evolution. So we can look at things like the evolution of virulence and viral pathogens, the evolution of cooperation in bacteria, the evolution of multicellularity in a single cell cutting. Just other topics that are interesting. Overall, what we're doing is we're building models of one stripe or another, mathematical, computational, or microbial, to explore how these complex and understand how these complex living systems behave due to their underlying the form and the evolution of their underlying interactions, the interactions that define them. So that's roughly.
I'm Charlene Santana. I'm also faculty in the biology department, and I'm also the curator of mammals at the Bird Museum. In my lab, there are 4 PhD students and 3 postdocs, and a variable number of undergrads throughout the year. We study the ecomorphology and evolution of mammals, so we integrate studies of the anatomy, behavior, and ecology of mammals, and we particularly focus on bats. And that is because bats represent a big diversity of mammals. They're about 20% of all mammals, and they have a broad diversity in terms of their ecology. So we want to understand what features of their morphology and their behavior have made them so successful. So as opposed to Ben, my organisms are very long-lived, so we cannot study evolution in action like he methods. So what we do is we look at living species that we use museum specimens, or we go out to the field to document the behavior of bats, and then we use statistical methods to infer the evolutionary patterns of all the traits that may have made bats so successful. So we do this combination of field methods, but also a lot of work in the lab to trace the evolution of traits and also to quantify the morphology.
Hi, I'm Abigail Swan. I'm a professor in both the biology department and the Department of Atmospheric Sciences. So I focus on how the Earth system, the climate in particular, works differently because there are plants in it. Mostly think about land plants. So maybe at the largest spatial scale of everybody here, but I'm interested in what are the consequences of where forests grow on Earth? How do they influence the atmosphere? How are they exchanging water and energy? And so that actually means we have to think all the way from the scale of what's happening physiologically in the plants, what's happening at the leaf level, all the way up to what's happening on continental and global scales. And we use a lot of numerical methods to do this because we're trying to understand what happens over broad spatial scales. So we use what are called big global climate models. We use other types of numerical simulations, and we analyze data sets from satellite and from networks of ground observations. So right now I have 5 graduate students in my lab, although one is about to finish and 2 have just started. So we're at probably a peak size, as well as 1 undergraduate.
Hey everyone, I'm Julie Terrio. My lab has actually only been here in the biology department for about 2 months at this point. We moved here from Stanford University, where I was on the faculty for 21 years. We are cell biologists. We try to study and understand the dynamics and mechanics of the physical processes that give cells their shapes and enable them to move. And we do that in a variety of contexts. We use cells ranging from diatoms to fish skin to human white blood cells. And we also are particularly interested in understanding the mechanical interactions between bacterial pathogens and human host cells. But really all of that is just an excuse to do video microscopy, because video microscopy is very fun. So in terms of what we actually do day to day in the lab, a lot of it is collecting data on the video microscope and then figuring out computational ways to analyze those images so we can get quantitative data out of them, and then pair that together with mathematical modeling and computational modeling to try to understand the bases of these behaviors. When I was at Stanford, I was on the medical school faculty, and now of course we're in the College of Arts and Sciences. I think for those of you who are thinking about going to graduate school in a realm that touches on any sort of biomedical applications, you're probably weighing the various merits of those 2 different styles. I think Daniel can also speak to that as well as I can. So if you have any questions about sort of compare and contrast between that, I think we'd be happy to discuss them.
And Scott, if you could introduce yourself.
I'm Dan in the back row. I'm Scott Freeman. I'm a lecturer here, and I don't supervise graduate students directly, but I sit on committees for students who want to do either a side project or sometimes a chapter on education research. That's my specialty. And I also do a lot of help with faculty development for students who want to do teaching as part of their career. I try to help them up and start that.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Sorry about the kerfuffle at the beginning. We're trying to get this streaming, and it is working fine right now, but I'm also really excited to see so many people here in person. We want to turn it over to you. We have a bunch of questions that if no one asks questions, like we will get faculty to respond to the questions we think are interesting, but since everyone in this room besides us probably just feel free to ask anything that you may not understand the process, or like how does the application works, anything that you want an answer for, and you can specify a faculty member or not, and we'll let the faculty jump in, I think.
You mentioned weighing options between going through the medical side and general biology side. When we select biology, one of the things we can select, for example, is some biology. What's the difference between that program and
So I think the simplest version, please correct me if I'm wrong because I'm still doing research here, but Cell molecular covers a lot of animals besides humans and a lot of organisms that are animals. So cell molecular would also include people working on plants, people working on microbes. Whereas something that's more specifically biomedical focused would tend to either focus on actual human biology or on model systems that are frequently used to mimic human diseases like mice. So it's worth always, whenever you're considering a particular program, to just look down the list of the faculty who are affiliated with that. Most places will have a few sentences description of each of the faculty. And so if you have a sense of if you want to be in an area that's more focused or if you want to be in an area that's more broad, you should be able to get a sense of that. For me, that was actually a big part of the attraction of moving to the University of Washington is I think there's a lot of really interesting fundamental concepts of biology that can be best appreciated by looking at them from multiple different perspectives, including plant perspectives, microbial perspectives, the perspective of bats. So to me, the diversity was really a big draw, but that might not necessarily be the right fit for everybody when they're going to graduate school. Some people really prefer to have a more narrowly defined team that they work in, rather than sort of similar questions.
The other thing that particularly you would find differently here that if you were studying, if you were in cell biology lab in the Department of Biology versus the graduate student in the NCB program, which is an umbrella program in many departments and many institutions, within Grad School, for example. In the NCB program, you might find yourself in a lab where neither your mentor nor any of the students in the lab doing teaching. Whereas in biology, you're much more likely in a lab where some of the students are supported and it's part of doing some teaching. There's more opportunity for teaching. In an NCB program, if you're interested in teaching, those opportunities are there, but you have to kind of find them yourself. And again, the research focus might be different, and the kind of funding, pressure on funding, number of grants that a mentor running a biomedical lab is expected to have versus a professor in the Department of Biology is going to be different. So that the environment can be very similar, it can be quite different. It's important to visit them, to reach out to the labs and learn about them. But there are definitely general cultural differences with lots of them.
All right, well, we can go to our question list. So one thing that I think a lot of you might be able to weigh in on is when you're looking at an application from a grad student or potential grad student, what do you look at first? What do you care about the most, and how do you use the components of the application?
I speaking for myself, I tend to focus actually on the personal statement that our department now actually has 2 statements of research in that personal statement. To me, that's the sort of straightest path to get to know the student. So that is even more so than the numbers of the GPA. I would go straight to the personal statement, and then letters of recommendation are also things that are important.
I'll echo what Ben said. Also, to me, when I'm looking at the personal statement and or the research statement, both, as well as maybe the CV or the resume, it's really important for me. I really look to see whether the students that are applying to my lab have some level of research experience or something that suggests that they know what they're getting themselves into, because graduate school is really different from being
I would agree with Monica. I'm really interested in seeing that students have had some kind of research experience. It's not very important to me that research experience is relevant at all topic-wise, but I want them to know that what research is about and that it's that this open-ended process is very different from taking courses, and that that's actually something they want to do.
Just on a practical level, if you're asking people to write letters for you, you've done research for those individuals, having them speak to that directly and address these issues in very squarely. So that's something you can ask your letter writers.
Oh, well, before you speak, could you try to speak up so that the recording captures the questions as well as the answers? Thanks.
We can repeat the question.
So I was just wondering if you guys had any advice for people who may not know what research is, like what they should do when they're looking for maybe a lab to apply
Just to repeat the question, I want to answer it, but what happens when an applicant has a tremendous, the first step of research interests, and how do you structure your application?
I would say it varies. For certain programs, you would apply to work directly at a lab, and other programs would apply to the program. So I think that's going to determine a little bit what the switch is. And I think it's a little field dependent in some cases. The certain fields might expect you to also target a little bit more the labs that you're applying towards in order to target more broadly the area. So I would say you have a lot of research experiences to tailor your application towards what the how the program works, or you could contact faculty and ask them as well to do that.
You heard, excuse me, you heard what's called rotations? Maybe somebody on the
Yeah, sure. I was just gonna say, so there are different programs go by usually one of two different main flavors. Our program actually is kind of a blend, which is the most unusual option, but usually either you are what is called direct admitted into a lab, that is to say a professor said, Yannicka says, this is the person that I want to come work for me, and you go and work in their lab. And from the minute that you step foot on campus, like that's the lab that you are going to. And the other option is to do what's called rotations, where you really are being accepted into a program or a department. These programs are often multi-departments, they span multiple departments, sometimes even multiple institutions, or even within one department, but you still are admitted as a group, a class to that department. And then you spend somewhere around 10 weeks, like here it's by quarter, at other places it varies the length, but then you basically go through usually 3 different lab experiences before you actually have to commit to the lab that you finally want to join. And so that definitely, programs that offer rotations are definitely give the advantage that you get to kind of sample a little bit. So that can be really helpful if you are, for instance, really interested in chromatin, but you don't know actually what system you want to study it in, and you could work in a fly lab and in a plant lab and in a mammalian lab. So you could sort of sample and see kind of which is going to fit the best for you, for example. So that's one part of the answer. I also would say for my own students, I really strongly, the undergraduates who work in my lab, I really strongly urge people to consider taking some time before between undergraduate and graduate school to go and work in a lab full time. And there are often technician positions for an entry, what we would call a post-bac, someone who just recently graduated, a short-term kind of program. There's actually even formal post-bac programs that you can apply to at places like the National Institute of Health that give you an experience to really figure out a little bit more of also what is it that draws you to a given research program, like what you love, what maybe you don't love, to try to help you sort of figure that out. And actually all of my graduate students, all of them have had some experience in between. And it isn't always that they have done research. Sometimes they've taught or done other kinds of, have other kinds of experiences. Some have worked in companies. So it's not, but I think to do something in between undergrad and grad can also, when you have really broad interest, can help you kind of start to develop a little bit more of an idea of what you really want to spend, what is indeed, as was already mentioned, a pretty intense, dedicated effort in one area. So I think that can help. I think often when I see people who apply who, in their personal statements where it's really broad, their interest, that's actually sometimes a cause of concern. So I think you want to be careful how you phrase that. So I think and I think having other faculty, actually read, mentors actually try to read what you've written and give feedback can be helpful, because you want to be somebody who's deeply curious. That's a good pro, but you don't want to seem like someone who actually could work on anything, because that's a con. Because that seems like maybe you're not at the right moment to actually decide that you want to spend 5 years doing research in an area, right? Like that you haven't done, that you're not yet at that point to be ready to do it. So.
One thing that I would add to that is I think it's really important that you put your best foot forward, as Jennifer was suggesting, in your application, one way to do that is to make sure that you're targeting each application, that you aren't just writing a generic application and then sending it to a few graduate schools that want to spend that much money on. Each graduate program has its particular strengths, and you will do yourself and the admissions committee a favor if you write it in a targeted way. So even if you're not sure what you're doing, if you could say, I'm interested, I don't know yet for sure what I want to do, but I'm really excited about these 3 areas of strength that are represented in the biology department. And if you mention 3 areas of strength that actually nobody here is working on, you'll know that it's probably not a good fit for you. So be sure to target your application. And if you are really excited about 2 or 3 particular faculty at a department you're applying to, mention that in your application, and be sure to reach out to them before you apply. So you really want to work hard on each application.
Yeah, just to expand on that a little bit more, the process of finding a graduate school is a matching process. It's not like there's a best program that everybody's trying to get into and then there's some hierarchy. It's really about trying to find the right fit between the individual student, the individual program, and the individual lab. And so knowing what you're interested in scientifically, if your interests are particularly broad, that can help you, in a sense, focus your search, because then you can look for an environment where you'll have the opportunity to go to seminars that are in a wide variety of different kinds of scientific areas, as opposed to other kinds of programs that may be more narrowly focused on one thing or another. So for everybody, this process of finding what the best fit is going to be very individual, because all of you have different interests and different strengths, and that's just part of the process, and good to keep in mind.
I just wanted to say that it's a wonderful thing that you have broad interests. I'm guessing a lot of people here have broad interests and are curious people, which is a wonderful thing. Just to echo what everyone has said here, in terms of your application, the person that I want to run this by our faculty, they might do it. It's also that there may be thematic reasons why you have broad interests. Maybe there's some thread that you can sort of write through a personal statement as to here's a bunch of things that I've found for this reason, and this is a real strength of this department. Also, the kind of department that you apply to, really sort of doing that. There are integrated departments that really cross different scales, spatially, temporally, lots of different systems being treated, as well as more focused departments. So that might influence what kind of schools you have.
Good way to apply for grad school is to read papers and when applying, how specific should your research interests be to one apply?
So it's just two questions that I think on online. So when you apply, some advice that was given to you was that you need to read a little research to labs that you're targeting in your application, and how specific within your application should you be with regards to that research. Is that sort of accurate?
I mean, that might depend a little bit. Like, I think if you do have some very specific research interests and you found some faculty members in different departments that do exactly that kind of research, then that almost makes your job of choosing where to go a little kind of easier, but it makes your choice clear. And you should definitely, I think this sort of echoes in what was said in the last question, you should definitely communicate interest in that research, right? In that particular research and wanting to pursue that in your personal statement and the conversations you have with this faculty. I guess a follow-up on that is, it is not most faculty, I think almost all faculty do not expect you to have your full PhD question like mapped out and ready to go. When I interview grad students, I love to talk about the science they've done or the questions that they might be interested as a way to talk about science, to get a sense of what excites students and what their thought processes are. But it's not that I expect they're going to do that project. So I think it can be very compelling in a personal statement as a way to demonstrate that you really are interested in that lab, to potentially describe some commonalities or some potential questions that are ongoing in that lab that we're also interested in, but don't feel like you're committing yourself to doing that project for 6 years. But I don't know if that quite answers your question.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sure. I just would like to add to that because I get a lot of emails from prospective students who I think go to my website and they look at our list of publications and they pick out the first 2 papers and they'll contact me and say, I read your paper on first publication that's on the list, which may or may not be representative of the research of the lab, because we do a lot of collaborative work too. Right? So I have papers that are on bad ways, but that's not my research. So I would advise to, as you're going through the process of like potential advisors and looking at the publications, to be a little bit more mindful and look at the full list, try to get a sense of the overall research program of the lab as instead of going just by some specific papers.
Yeah, I just want to add. I mean, I think that there's also a really I think often people's websites are more useful than trying to read their whole, like when you're trying to look broadly. I think not everyone keeps their websites updated, which is its own issue. But I think that's also might be a sign of something. It might be about how much they're looking to recruit people into their lab. Because I think one of the things I would say is when you write an email to an individual faculty saying that you're wondering if they're accepting graduate students, you read. I think actually to be able to say, I've been looking at your website and I see that these are some of the themes that come out, and perhaps you add there, like I read this paper and this aspect of it I was really excited by. Those emails definitely rise to the level of like, I will definitely respond. If I get a sort of generic, like, dear sir, that's really not a helpful one way to start, but often we get ones that are much more sort of, are you accepting graduate students? Like, I'm very interested in your research. Thanks very much. Sign up. Right? Like, that's not, we're notoriously as faculty have overflowing inboxes and are often quite slow at getting back to emails. And so that kind of an email that's really generic would be one I wouldn't be able to respond to very quickly, probably. It wouldn't be my priority. Compared to one that actually seemed like someone spent, some time actually trying to figure out what I did and actually write with some specificity. So I think no one would expect you, just like what Jan was saying, no one would expect you to come to graduate school actually having read and totally understood and be like able to spew out in figure 2D. I was really excited by the ball, like not like that level of detail, but sort of the general sense that you've taken the time to figure out what the lab is interested in doing and how it relates to what you're interested in. I think you get a very strong response. And I think that's in your personal statement too. I think part of it is trying to, we're trying to get to know you and trying to help exactly what Julie was saying. Like, is this going to be a good match? Like, we want to take people into our groups that are going to be really happy and successful in the work. And part of it is trying to suss out from often a very short statement, like, is there that spark of connection where you sort of see that the person knows what they're getting into and is thoughtful about that, and that really connects on a theme that we're also excited about. So that's, yeah.
And in terms of the process where you get to, so Jen was starting to talk about sort of something you might do before reading papers, even before looking at websites. I would recommend also talking to faculty in areas that you're interested in here. So if you're reading a class, I'm really excited about this area. You know people that are doing exciting work in this area. It's going to be, to read a paper from every single place that you apply, it's going to be, you need a lot of free time. It's a lot to do. So I agree that you get a more holistic view of the person. However, if you get super excited by it, then reading a paper actually may be a beautiful compliment that it may get you more excited about this. It may make the interaction you have via email with that member before the applications are due more meaningful for them and more likely to produce a conversation. But I maybe start with getting advice and orientation so that you can narrow the search.
I want to answer a question that hasn't been asked yet, but I think is an important consideration in the life of a graduate student, and that's the question about money. And the answer that I would give to the question about how important is money, first of all, to say that as a graduate student, you no longer have to pay to be here, you will be paid to be here.
In the sciences.
In the science.
In a PhD.
In a PhD program. Thank you. You'll be paid to be here. And if you're applying to a PhD program at a university in biology and they're not going to pay you, then don't apply. Any reputable program in biological sciences will pay you. You are not going to get rich, but you will have enough for food and clothing and shelter and books and what little spare time you have to enjoy yourself, you have a little bit of money for that. So the one thing that I would add is that when you're considering programs, assuming that they're paying you enough that you will be able to rent an apartment that's safe if not luxurious, and you'll be able to feed yourself and clothe yourself, don't worry about the difference. This program is offering $500 more than that program. Worry about this program has amazing students. This program has a mentor that I'm so excited to work with. This program is in a place where I'm going to be really happy. Try not to worry about the money, because the differences are just kind of noise. And that's just my opinion. So,
I think it's a societal decision that actually there's economic payback that comes out of training people in science, technology, engineering. I mean, I think that's sort of a societal contract that says that that's actually that we need more people with that training at a higher level. And so I think it's, I'm not sure if it started in the 50s, but I wouldn't be surprised, sort of the Sputnik era, that this was like a way to really incentivize people. Where it might have been a divergent point then, but it's certainly, I think that's one of the reasons.
So just to repeat the question for
sorry.
We'll play it down style until they answer
Yeah.
that. But why is this science specific as opposed to in general?
Also, on the theme of money, do you guys know the difference between RAs, TAs, and fellowships or traineeships? That might be something we could hear on.
We have a video, so you can feel free to talk about it, but yeah.
I was just going to say Jen's answer was very philosophical, which is great, but a sort of more practical way to put it relates to Scott's comment, which is that there is a lot of grant money associated with scientific research, and that grant money often goes to funding some of these positions, the ones that are called research assistantships. Fellowships,
Those are RAs.
Yeah, the RAs. Fellowships and sort of teaching-related positions do potentially exist in fields outside of the sciences, but we tend to have more grant money available for those philosophical reasons of why we as a society decided to do that.
Well, it's also, right, biology is the biggest undergraduate major on this campus, so the number of teaching assistantships that we have to support the classes that many of you have taken in our department are a lot more than Slavic languages, for example, right? I mean, just that, like, if you have, just the amount of resources that we have, and this is also, one could argue, is still related to the sort of broader sense that people often decide to major in biology, which is awesome, but also sometimes because they think that it might have a more obvious career trajectory. So, all right, so the third thing Scott mentioned was fellowships. I just wanted to say, so for any of you that are thinking about applying to graduate school, you should definitely be looking into, there are a whole set of fellowships that are out there, and the most sort of highest success rate, one of the ones that are out, the one that has the most options or most slots available is the National Science Foundation has a graduate research fellowship program. And that is something that you apply to, and you can apply to it as many times as you want before you are a graduate student, and then one time after you are a graduate student before your second year. And if you were awarded that, then that and several of these other fellowships from other federal funding agencies and some private philanthropies as well, give you usually 3 years of support So you get paid, and often you are paid more than you would be paid at the rate that everyone else is paid in the department. So sort of the same rate, the baseline rate you get. And that, which is nice, and it's also prestigious, just as something to put on your resume. So that is the third way that you can get paid is by a fellowship. So either you're on a grant, on someone's grant, which is this RA, you're teaching in a classroom, and that's a TA, or you are self-funded through a fellowship, a grant that you yourself understand.
Just to add something to up at NSF, which is due in late October, so the cycle has already passed. For those of you who are juniors, you're keep that time in mind. You want to apply. It's also an incredibly good signal to apply for when you're applying for graduate school. It just tells the sort of school as you're preparing students. It's a good thing.
And just you don't have to know where you're going to go yet. Bring it with you.
So I just noticed like some people just enter the PhD program without finishing the master's program. I was just wondering how's it different from taking master's and PhD? Partly there's a historical thing. It used to be that in almost all disciplines, one would apply to a program, do a master's degree first, and then do a PhD. That's no longer true. There are some people who might go to do a master's degree. Often we see it with students who didn't have a particularly strong record as an undergrad, maybe they didn't do any research at all. I'll apply to a master's program and then apply to a PhD from that. But students coming into biology or PhD don't necessarily have a master's, and they don't do a master's as part of that.
It's a little field specific. Still, there are some fields I think that I don't know if anyone here wants to speak to that. There's some fields that definitely a master's is more frequently seen, but for our biology students, I would say it is still pretty unusual that people are applying with a master's, and they are allowed to. I mean, this is sort of getting a bit into the details, but you can actually get a master's along the way to getting your PhD. And sometimes people do that if they're thinking about industry, for example, because sometimes having that master's in hand when they're applying, even before they've gotten their PhD, can be an advantage. But it's kind of really a seamless part of the process, and most of our PhD students don't actually have a master's. They just go straight from their undergraduate degree to getting their PhD. And that's partially, I just want to say the other thing is, instead of getting a master's if you're in a molecular cell development kind of area, that's also one of the things that you can get a technician position that one of these postdocs. I always say that these are basically masters where you are paid. So like a lot, like relative. Like you will get paid usually more as a technician than you will as a graduate student. So for example, for me, like it really made a difference. I was able to save a lot of money during those years, the 2 years in between my undergraduate and going to graduate school, so that I had a little cushion, because it is true. I mean, Daniel's right that the stipend, we try to make it a living wage, but it is true depending on your family situation and what your loan responsibility and other family, it can be a pretty tight, a pretty clean set of years. And so having a little bit saved up can ease the mind.
I would say one other place where it's maybe a little more common to see masters is if people are really interested in some interdisciplinary bridging between fields. So masters as a terminal degree, very common in a lot of engineering fields, computer science, electrical engineering, things like that. And so I have, quite a few times seen applicants where they will have gotten a master's degree in something like applied mathematics or computer science, and then want to come into biology with the view of sort of blending together those different fields. Master's programs that are standalone master's programs tend to be much more coursework heavy than PhD programs tend to be.
I want to reiterate that it's super field dependent. So that's the norm sort of in this department, but even if you're thinking of biologically related fields that are a little farther afield from what might be in this department, there are some where it would be very standard to have a master's. Often anything where there is an applied career path that's outside of doing scientific research, thinking of like forestry or something like that, they would be very common to get a master's, or hydrology, very common to get a master's first, and their PhD programs often require that as a first step, and some of the students stop at that point and others here.
I was just going to follow up. SEPs here, they have both a master's and a PhD. I think they require their students to get a master's first and to get a PhD, but many of their students get a master's because that's all they need for the types of jobs. They need government jobs and agencies, not necessarily like involved in research, but not sort of doing research themselves necessarily. So it kind of also depends on what you want to do with that degree, as to whether you would consider, whether you kind of want to consider whether you want to get a master's or a PhD or get a master's on the way you change that makes sense.
When you're applying to grad school programs that aren't at the same institution where you're completing your undergraduate degree, how do you suggest connecting with faculty besides just reading their websites? Because here it's easier to connect because you're physically there. But if you want to apply to a school that's in a different state, how do you connect with those faculty members?
So the question is about for when you are applying to schools that are not the school that you're attending as an undergraduate, how do you connect with faculty?
I would suggest email. I mean, knowing that many emails, I think somebody here said many emails get unanswered. So, I mean, that is how I get most of the communications with the prospective grad students and all the grad students that have ended up in my lab have the first contact, as it were, has been via email. So you do, I guess, want to think hard about what you put in that email, and we can talk a little bit about that if you'd like. But that especially if it's someplace, I wouldn't suggest flying all the way out to the East Coast. You know what I mean? To be that's just not feasible for everybody. So email is definitely one way. If you've done some research as an undergraduate and you're able to go to a national meeting, that's sometimes that's possible, but that's a great place to network like the year before and meet folks. But honestly, probably email is. I'm trying to think. I think that's probably. I mean, I guess we should look at everything else.
Yeah.
What is that? Yes.
I agree completely. I think the perfect combination is email, and if you go to that conference, you can email the potential advisor and invite them to your presentation or your poster. I think that's really powerful way to connect with potential advisors.
If you happen to be, I'm actually next week meeting with two out of town prospective graduate students who happen to be visiting town. They wrote me and said, can we meet? And so we're going to meet for half an hour or something to talk. So if you're traveling for other reasons to surface, you can also go on. But I think email is going to be probably the most. But that makes, like Monica was saying, that email kind of important in terms of the content. The other thing, regardless of how carefully you publish the email, there's a reasonable likelihood that you won't get an immediate answer, and it may be quite a way. And it's usually fine to write another email just in a very pleasant tone, saying, I just checking in and seeing if you got this earlier email. Some people have, after writing an email, also say I would, be more than happy to chat, via Skype or the phone if you have the time. That's an invitation. So,
I wanted to just follow up on one thing, the question about applying to schools outside of where you are currently a student. Unless there are personal reasons that you need to stay in the place where you are currently a student, I would urge you to look at other places, keeping in mind that whatever career path you're thinking about, graduate school is laying the next important foundation after undergrad. And if the best place is not in the place where you want to spend the rest of your life, it is going to be the best place to lay that foundation for a career that gives you a lot of personal fulfillment. Consider it seriously. Even if it's not your ideal city, it might be worth that trade-off of giving you the intellectual foundation, career opportunities, whatever it is. Really consider lots of different options rather than just, I love being around the mountains and the ocean. That's great, but there are.
By the way, never list that as the main reason to go to grad school.
Yeah, I would take it even a step further than that. There are a lot of programs that don't even consider accepting their own undergraduates because it's considered to be a good thing, I would say, in almost all scientific fields to have a breadth of different experiences and to have experienced several different kinds of scientific perspectives. And so deliberately, as you go through your undergraduate training and a master's, if you do want a PhD, postdoc, whatever your research journey is, deliberately going to different kinds of environments, different institutions, different kinds of departments is always considered to be a positive thing. It'll really help broaden your thinking
Can I? Sorry. No, go for it.
Okay. You guys kind of mentioned that like it's good to get like after undergrad and research. Is there like a good amount of time to do that? Like you said, you were looking for 2 years, like a year, 2 years.
So just the question. So the question was with Jen's earlier suggestion about a potential break between your graduation and starting graduate school, and how long that should be. Also, how you get something with that.
I think that's really personal. I've had grad students taking 2 years off, and I've had grad students taking 10 or 11 years off. It's from the perspective of taking on the grad student, that hasn't really been an issue for me.
Yeah. One of my PhD students who just finished up a few months ago took 18 years off. He had a different career, and then decided to go into biology. As long as it feels right for you, that's probably
I think it is typical that these post-bac programs and things run 1 year usually. I think between 1 and 3 years is sort of what you see very commonly. But it is also true. I think like if you think that you might want to work in industry, for example, or you might want to work in a nonprofit setting or those things, this is a great opportunity to actually get firsthand experience to figure out what you kind of want to do with your degree. And you may find that getting a PhD can often preclude you from having the kind of position that you actually want. So you want to make sure that a PhD is actually required and even recommended for whatever career track you want to go on. So I guess I speak also for myself. I really didn't know when I graduated as an undergrad what I wanted to do. Like I really wasn't sure. And so for me, those 2 years of working full time in a lab helped me realize, well, one, I really didn't want to work on mice. I really wanted to work on plants. That was really useful information. And also that I really loved doing research and wanted to do more of it. So I think that's part of it is also like if you end up in a great job and you're really happy, well then, like, that's a win, right? Like and so I think that's part of it is not feeling pressured that you have to stay on anybody else's idea of what the right track is.
That said, there are many students that we see in our application pool who are applying straight from undergrad, who accept, who come here, are ready and excited to get into grad school. So it's a very personal.
I mean, I just will second what Jen was saying earlier because I actually took 2 years off between my undergrad and grad school. I went to Venezuela and worked with a Fulbright scholar studying functions. So very far from what I'm doing now. It was wonderful. It definitely got me excited about research. For those of you who haven't done research, and with some of the comments that I've heard on the panel, that research is something people take seriously, potential advisors take seriously. That's an opportunity to get exposed to some research. But more importantly, it's an opportunity to learn about yourself, what you're interested in, what specific type of research you're interested in, which may just be yes this or no this. And that can be immensely helpful in making choices about good, well-informed choices about that. So I agree with the 1 to 3.
One more point on that is like a perspective of the people in my lab. I have a student who came straight through from undergrad. I had a student who spent 5 years working as an engineer and then decided he really wanted to go back and do science. A student who went back and got a second undergraduate degree after finishing her first one because she realized she wanted to do science. And a student who worked as a writer for a couple of years and a student who worked as like a data analyst in something unrelated to the specific science. So it's a huge diversity that we see, and I think it depends, our interest in accepting students depends a lot more on them being the right fit and the right science interests, and that this is actually something that they want to do, and this is a good time to do it, rather than exactly what that trajectory looks like.
How do you find research opportunities to do in between if you want to test it out?
How do you find research opportunities?
Oh, how do you find research opportunities? Okay, yeah. So the question is, how do you find research opportunities?
I think specifically in between undergrad.
Oh, in between, in that time between,
That's probably field specific. If you're interested in ecology and evolution positions, I can send you a couple of places where people tend to post those kinds of opportunities. But if you were more interested in cellular and molecular like that would only work for some fields. students. I wonder if they have
Yeah, I mean, a really great thing is to find brand new faculty because they almost always are going to be hiring a technician and you get to help them sort of build. You're their first hire and you get to help them sort of set up their lab. Like that can be actually a really great thing if you're on it and you send an email. So I mean, and so often if you talk to faculty you know, they may actually know who are some of the new faculty who are hired either here but also all over. Like we actually know often, like science is, these fields, like in many ways, they're often smaller. Some of them are smaller than you might think, and the networks of connections are well known, and so we can help you sort of figure out. And also, we may have colleagues who we also could exchange emails to see if they're actually looking for someone. So, I mean, people do. There is a lot of word of mouth in that kind of work, in that kind of those positions. But it is also true that if any of the research institutions, like for me, like I didn't have it. I did not go the network route. I basically saw an ad in, I'll date myself, but like in the class section in the paper, and I called on the landline, right? And it was, and basically it was an HR, human resources department within a research institute in the city that I was living in. And they basically had a whole listing of, all of the faculty who were looking for entry level positions. And they connected, they showed they took my resume and showed it to those people, and a few of them decided to interview me. And, so that's how it works too. So I think also at places like that, there's also, so places that would be like the Hutch, as opposed, like the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, as opposed to the University of Washington. Often those kind of places have their own human resources that are very effective at connecting you. So calling some of those or emailing them might be ways.
And actually here at UW, we have UW Hires, and if you go to the Human Resources website for the University of Washington, every week you will see new tech positions advertised for labs in biology and biomedically related labs throughout the campus, South Union. Yeah, and that's true for any major university in the country. So if you decide that you want to live in Indiana, you can go to all the universities in Indiana and go to their HR agencies and you'll see positions.
So there's a question that I suspect won't get asked, but I want to make sure that it gets answered. I think everyone in this room is thinking a lot about how to get into grad school. And I want to ask our faculty to talk a little bit about how to survive and thrive in grad school, because it's very hard. So Claire and I are in grad school right now. It's a difficult process. And speaking as PIs, right, people who mentor grad students, knowing that it's a hard thing to thrive through, and knowing that it's harder for people who come from backgrounds that maybe aren't traditionally represented as well in science, how do you suggest prospective students figure out if someone is going to be a mentor that will support them and help them through grad school? How like, what are red flags that you might notice in an interview with a faculty member? How can you tell if someone's going to be a great mentor?
I would say my top advice is to talk to a grad student.
Yes.
And in the program.
If they're happy, they will tell you. If they're happy, they will tell you.
And you don't need to you don't need to go to an interview to make contact with grad students and write email if you want to. I don't know if they got that whole question from you, but basically the sort of idea here was not just about applications, but once you're at the graduate school, how does the student thrive while there, and what advice does this channel?
Or how to figure that out.
Yeah.
And how to pick the right mentors that maximizes that.
One thing that I think is very important, particularly if you're going straight from undergrad to grad school, is to realize that the pacing is very, very different. So for a lot of undergrads, at least when I was an undergrad back in the previous millennium, everything was very much focused around the semester, time frame. And so I might take a bunch of classes and really overcome myself, but I knew when this particular date came, it was going to be over, and I would just take my final exams and I could move on to something else. And that doesn't happen in grad school. I mean, in grad school, and I would say in scientific research, it's never over. So you have to find a way to keep a pace that's actually going to be sustainable, not just for a month or a semester, but for years, and, really arguably for your life. And that means, finding support, finding networks of friends. It means keeping yourself healthy. It means maintaining whatever it is that you individually need to maintain some sense of perspective and some sanity while you're going through this very difficult long-term process. And that's something that's fair to talk about. It's absolutely fair to talk about other graduate students in the lab that you're targeting or the program that you're targeting. And it's fair to bring that up with the PI, either in the context of interview or direct communication about, what's their philosophy about how graduate students can maintain, a healthy pace of work without burning themselves out.
I guess I would like to say just that the change from undergrad to a grad student is a pretty profound change. You're moving from sort of being a consumer of scientific research to being a producer of scientific work. That means your own ego is out there. You're in a very vulnerable position, and that can be a very hard transition for students. So picking, and I think we have mentioned sort of imposter syndrome issues, but that can sort of be an activator for feeling like an imposter. And I think some of these issues may be heightened if you're dealing with other layers, being a first generation student or from an underrepresented group. But the first thing I think is to echo what Charlene and Yannick were saying. Part of what you're assessing in talking to students in those labs is what kind of sort of support net do they have in the lab for that natural rough transition. If you're seeing a bunch of happy students that are really excited about what they're doing, and you will get that. I mean, then you're probably on the right track for a supportive environment. You can also, of course, interact with the PI and ask them about their philosophy around this.
I would add to that also. You may want to consider the grad program as a whole too, because sometimes it does happen that sometimes it does not work out between a particular student and their PI, and then I have to switch advisors. So having a broader view that who might be there for you if that has to happen. What is the support system for the grad students across the grad program? Those are questions that you can ask in your editing.
And that grad program can provide a lot of support, even if you do have a supportive lab environment. They can still provide a lot of additional support for you as a graduate student who are going through the challenge of learning how to be a scientist. I would also, I think this sort of echoes what a lot of what has been said already, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to step back and ask yourself what kind of mentoring relationship you want with the PI and what kind of lab you want to be in, and then if you get to the point where you're interviewing at a graduate school, they're interviewing you, but you're interviewing them as well. So I mean, I often ask prospective grad students like what kind of mentor are you looking for? You can certainly ask yourself that as well, and then ask what kind of mentoring style do you have, because that match is important to to sort of like, do you want, like, are you somebody that really likes having regular meetings, or would rather not? Like, if there's sort of a disconnect in what you and your PI might want, I think lead to some, just maybe a mismatch on that.
Some specific questions that will impact your experience in the lab as well that you can ask are, is the lab well funded so that you'll actually have the resources to do the science you want to do? Is it productive? Do they publish papers? If everyone is working but no one is publishing papers, it's sort of like a tree that falls in the forest and nobody hears. Ultimately, that's the currency of what we do, is communicating it to the rest of the scientific community to move things forward. So, funded, productive. How are projects chosen? Is it a lab where the PI says, I'm baking a pie and here's your piece of the pie, and you can take it or leave it, or are you totally on your own or somewhere in the middle? And then, as people have already alluded to, is it a fun place where people have a good time?
I guess I'd also just add a few more things that have to do with, I think, some of the aspects of looking for a PI who is able to support you in specific and not just generally as a good mentor. I think one of the things is look at who they have mentored if they've been doing the job for a little while, and make sure that you see some diversity in the people that are there, even just if it's not the diversity that you necessarily would bring. But if you sort of see a group that looks very homogeneous, and you do not feel like that is the group that you fit into, that is probably a sign that might be a more challenging lab environment to be in. I also would say that I think trying recognizing that there are actually institutional issues that kind of structural issues that can make it harder for people who are coming from traditionally underrepresented groups to thrive. I think it's important that you actually get a sense from the departments that you are interviewing at that they're aware of these issues and that they are talking about them. And that may not mean that everyone's perfect, but it may mean that at least you're not the person who has to be reinventing the wheel and bringing issues up that you look around and everyone says, I don't know what you're talking about. That is really can feel very lonely. So I think having places, I think recognizing that these issues do exist. I think also that is one of the things you can talk about with other graduate students who are there already to sort of ask questions about what is the conversation around equity in the department. I think is a very reasonable question to ask. And I think, right, I mean, track record is really very useful to really see. I think also labs that tend to have like a really, that have undergraduates working with them and have a group of, that tend to be those that take mentoring more seriously. I mean, that's sort of not a perfect match. There are reasons why not everyone has undergraduates in their lab, but that's often, if you see, it tends to be that most of the postdocs and grads also have undergrads who are working with them. It tends to suggest that this is an environment where mentorship is valued. And so I think that's also something you can ask about, like what happens with those students. Are they showing up? Are the undergrads showing up on papers? Like, are the undergrads presenting at meetings or at symposia? Like that kind of, those things are also telling you something about the culture of the lab. And I think that can be, those are some useful other clues.
I think that's a great point for departments that are centered in the College of Arts and Sciences or who have ready access to undergraduates. A lot of biomedical research graduate programs are in medical schools where the undergraduate campus might not be right across the street. It might be, 100 miles away if you're talking about Cornell. And so the lack of undergraduates in a lab at a medical school doesn't really mean anything.
But I would say, in those labs, sorry, I just want to say, in those labs, if you see that there are many, many postdocs, 20, 25 postdocs, there are no graduate students. It is not to say that there are never going to be graduate students who succeed in labs like that, but those are harder environments generally for graduate students to succeed in than places where they're not that, where there's more evidence.
My question kind of builds on that. Why would PIs hire graduate students compared to skilled postdocs?
So the question was, why would faculty hire bring in graduate students into the lab when you have somebody that has perhaps more experience in a postdoc?
It's an especially good question here because many schools, PI doesn't have to pay tuition as a tuition waiver. We don't have that here. So a graduate student costs about the same per year as a postdoc. Each of us will have a different answer. I just find it incredibly rewarding to work with graduate students. There's graduate students can often, even though they may not have as much experience, they can get as much done because they're really excited about learning new things. Sometimes they'll take more chances because they're not worrying about a career and new things in a new direction you wouldn't have thought of. So, again, they're awesome.
So I'm sorry, it's time to stop.
Graduate students are awesome.
I think we can all.
Thank you so much for coming today. Let's thank for coming also. Here's the YouTube channel, so you can access all the video my students did, and also this video will be archived. This Q&A session, so it's not hesitate. And we wanted to end up with just each one of us to give us a very short answer of what tips or advice you would have liked to hear when you were applying to grad school.
One sentence. No, you don't have to go in order.
So, one tip would be that being surrounded by people who are smarter than you are is going to be incredibly intimidating, and it will make you a better scientist.
I guess the one tip I would have is when you're at the stage of interviewing, if you find yourself completely excited and thrilled by the conversation you're having with the other people who are interviewing with you, that is a great sign. So one of my long-standing best friends of all time is someone who I was actually paired with at an interview, and we spent all day going around together. And I mean, I think it's more because of him than any other reason that I decided to go to that program. And it was like an excellent decision because actually the adventure we had together was much more fun. So that was more than one sentence of there.
So this is more about when you're in grad school rather than applying. But I wish somebody had told me, don't feel like get advice early and often rather than waiting until you think you have that perfect thing, because you never have that perfect thing. From your peers as well.
I'm also going to follow Jannika's lead and talk about after when it's in grad school. As I mentioned before, the first year is really, and I think many people sort of experience sort of imposter syndrome of some kind. The advice that I would have really loved is that actually that is telling you something important, which is that you may be sort of bouncing against the limits of your understanding, but really desiring to stretch them. And that's actually helpful for this positive element.
So great. So yeah, my advice would also be while in grad school, or I guess maybe this applies to other careers as well, that work-life balance is something that you achieve over time and not necessarily every day, which is something that I think it's helpful to keep in mind. In grad school, many days you'll have to push yourself to work really hard, and sometimes not just days but weeks. But if you think about it in a more holistic and way in which you make time for yourself and your personal life, you might not be able to do it every day, but if you do it periodically to keep yourself healthy, then that's something that can be accomplished and you can aim for. But do not stress out too much if it's that every day you don't have the perfect balance. None of us do. Don't underestimate being happy in graduate school. I think you will do better science if you're happy. And so in particular, thinking about who you choose as a mentor and what program you go to, making sure that that's a place that you can thrive, and don't get overwhelmed by sort of prestige of the scientists and things like that cause you to overlook red flags about what might make you unhappy there, because you won't end up being a good scientist if that's the environment you're trying to succeed in. You'll be a better scientist if you go somewhere where you'll be successful and productive.
So going back to the transition part, I'd say try to look at this as a wonderful opportunity that you've all presumably done fairly well in science here, and that's why you're thinking about going to graduate school. So this is a great chance to really broaden your horizons, think about doing some kind of work you haven't done before, living in a place that you haven't lived before, exposing yourself to new ideas you haven't been exposed to before. It's really a great transition point to go from here to anywhere. And looking at that as being, a really rare opportunity that doesn't come along that many times in your lifetime, I think can make the process a lot more fun.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Oh yeah, take a cookie as you leave.